A very good morning and welcome to your favorite Sunday morning show. That's Media Monitor, and I'm your host, Alicia Jali. You are watching us live here on the SABC News channel. We have a packed show as usual. But before we get any further, let's get a quick look at the top stories this hour. UCT rape suspect is expected to appear in court tomorrow. This follows a series of rapes at Rhodes Memorial. The state of education in the Eastern Cape is expected to take centre stage when the ANC Tripartite Alliance meets in Port Elizabeth today. US President Barack Obama has called on presidential candidates to avoid divisive and derogatory language. He has weighed into the increasingly heated race for his successor in the White House. All right, let's now have a quick look at our front pages of the Sunday newspapers. That's the Sunday Times there, and the headline is about allegations of the Gupta family's attempts to influence the appointment of Finance Minister. The City Press leads with a story about former ANC Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe calling for failed leaders to step down. The Sunday Independent leads with the headline about the Hawks boss giving Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan an ultimatum to respond to his questions by tomorrow or else face the consequences. The Weekend Argus is leading with a story about an alleged UCT rape suspect being caught. And of course, Sunday Tribune leading with the same headline as the Sunday Independent. It's about the Finance Minister being given an ultimatum to respond to the Hawks boss. All right, I'm very honored to be joined by two veteran journalists this morning. I'm talking about Mr. Mathatha Tsedu making a return. He is the Sanef General Director, as well as Ms. Paula, Managing Director of Fray Inter-media. It's very good to have both of you back in studio with me. A very good morning.
No, thank you. Morning.
Good morning, Alicia.
All right, first up for discussion today is, of course, our pick of the day in today's newspaper headlines, and that is page 10 of the City Press. And it simply reads there, when 530 million rand isn't spent. Now, apparently the Eastern Cape government recently returned 530 million rand to National Treasury, even though some schools are in dire conditions. Paula, what do you have to say about this?
You know, it's an interesting story because the Treasury actually allocated 7.4 billion.
Yes.
So it's quite a large amount of money, and the money that was returned in percentage terms is less than 10%. But it's still an issue that's really worrying, because one would assume that the money was allocated because they knew that it was ready to be spent. True. And ready to be used. And I think that the numbers are quite dire. There are about 442 schools that were identified as needing work to be done. And only about 242 of those schools, in fact, have either had the work done or in process of being finalized. So there's still a lot of work still to be done. But I do also think that a time of fiscal responsibility, that if money isn't spent when it's allocated, it should in fact be returned.
What do you think, Mr. Sid? Should it be returned?
Yeah, I think it should be returned. I'm sure that it's a runaround.
A rotational,
yeah.
Yes.
Treasury rules are that if you don't spend, the money goes back. You then have to motivate why in your next budget that money should also be returned back to you, and then you would have to show that you now have capacity to use it. The problem in the Eastern Cape is that you have the highest number of mud schools or structures that are not fit for children. So everybody is clamoring around trying to do everything at the same time. And it is proving to be impossible. They wouldn't have the builders and the everything else that is needed to actually do those 442 schools in 1 year. It is not possible for a province like that to do it. But the fact that they've spent almost 90% of the money, it's actually a good thing. And they should be congratulated for that. And one hopes that indeed the structures are going to go down. The structures where kids are really like studying under trees in a country where we're spending 200 and something million building somebody a home. It doesn't make sense at all.
But Paula, then why return the money if the work hasn't been properly done? I mean, who's not doing their job? Who's not allocating that money accordingly? And who's not following up on the work that is being done in schools?
As Mathatha was saying, in fact, the Treasury rules are that if the money hasn't been spent within the financial year, it does go back. But I mean, it is an issue of capacity. It is an issue of capacity to be able to deliver what needs to be done. And as Mathatha was saying, the Eastern Cape has a huge problem.
True, we always see that in
major
the news.
Needs. Absolutely. I mean, in the news, you're right. I mean, we saw that in the news that, the Eastern Cape is on top of the ANC's agenda today, precisely because it has such a huge issue.
In fact, the issue around not spending money is the reason why when you move towards end of financial year, you find departments scurrying around trying to just find somebody, bring me a plan. I have money I need to spend immediately. And that's where serious corruption then happens.
So it's a good and bad thing that they actually return the money, but then they're not spending it
it's not just being given to Mathatha, who walks in on the 31st of March with a plan to spend 500 million. And it is then approved immediately. And I start going around getting my 4x4.
All right, let's now move on to page 4 of the Sunday Independent, and it simply reads, now this is a very interesting story. Motsamai's plight falls on deaf ears. Now apparently here, the decision now to release Janus Wallace on parole has apparently angered the family of PAC and APLA freedom fighter Kenny Motsamai, who's been in jail for almost 28 years for his party's sanctioned armed robbery, which claimed the life of a white traffic officer. Papa Tsedu.
It's now linked to Valush, and this is how this story is actually structured. That Valush in 14 days will be walking out. We don't know whether Minister Masuta is going to place the same kind of conditions that he has placed on Motsamai's parole conditions, because those conditions are actually placed by the minister and the Department of Correctional Services. So what we now have is a situation where the Motsamai family is arguing that here is a freedom fighter who in the course of struggle to liberate this country, killed a government official, leave alone what color the official was, killed a government official who was part of the system of oppression. And he is sitting in jail for almost 28 years now. Meanwhile, somebody else who killed a freedom fighter in order to derail the struggle is about to be released. So that's the family's argument. They are saying there's the logic is dodgy around this. But the bigger story, of course, is around whether Valush should be released or not.
And we're going to talk about that later, yes. Paula, what do you think very quickly on this topic?
And I certainly do think that the justice system needs to be able to stand up to the scrutiny and that the law is applied equally across the board.
I mean, do you think proper processes were followed in Motsamai's case as we're getting now in terms of Valush?
Well, certainly the perception seems to be that there's justice, that justice is different for different people.
All right, well...
Because Motsamai, Motsamai has been given parole, but his parole is that he has daytime parole. Every day he goes home, he spends a day there, and in the evening he must come back to jail and sleep there. And that is what Motsamai is saying. No, what's the point? You don't actually want me out there, so I might as well stay here. Personally, it's the first time I hear of a parole condition of that nature that says every day you go out and come back, every day. There's transport issues and all of that. Is the department going to be picking him up and bringing him back? Or is he supposed to fend for himself? It doesn't make sense to me.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there on the top stories of the day. It's time for a very quick ad break. And after that, we recap the biggest stories of the week. Do stay right there.
In order to implement the inter-trade in the continent, these two countries should give leadership. And indeed, that is a commitment we have as two countries to increase our economic activities. We discuss a lot of issues related to very specific issues in all areas of economy, and that is our intention, to grow the economy much faster.
This color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at ansa.org.za. ANSA is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
The deepening hunger crisis in Malawi is threatening the survival of children.
And also it is the life-threatening part of malnutrition.
Malawi is facing its worst food crisis in 9 years.
Mugabe is the world's oldest sitting head of state, ahead of Queen Elizabeth of Britain.
The veteran leader seeks to temporarily forget his party's problems and instead focus on his legacy.
But he shows no sign of slowing down or stepping down from power after 36 years in office.
With Media Monitor. Welcome back. Remember, your views are highly appreciated on our Twitter page at SA Media Monitor. Now, it's been a busy week for the country's courts as they pass judgments on two high-profile court cases that have been dominating headline news over the past weeks. In Cape Town, a woman who kidnapped Zephany Nurse in 1992 was found guilty of kidnapping, while the North Gauteng High Court sent Sindiseo Manele to prison for 12 years for murdering famous musician rapper Flabba. In another high profile, the granting of parole to Janus Valus for the murder of SACP leader Chris Hani raised some eyebrows at the Johannesburg High Court. And sections of the nation felt hard that done, as they believe that he has not shown any remorse. But let's first take a look at this insert.
Since the Eugene de Kock decision, which was the very first decision we had to make, which also revolved around victim participation, where we initially had rejected his application purely on those grounds, primarily on those grounds. We have since not considered a single parole application where there is no evidence of some effort of engaging victims. And this is a principle we intend to defend and we intend to advance. So the entire criminal justice system is being reviewed to look at in what way can we enhance the participation, active participation and support of victims in the system.
Let's talk about life sentences here in South Africa, because as we keep noting, at the time Jonas Wallace and Clive Derby-Lewis were sentenced to death for the assassination of Chris Hani. At that time, it was overruled. The death penalty was no longer part of the justice system, and it was turned into a life sentence. As far as we know, Jonas Wallace is perfectly healthy. There's no signs that he needs to be out on a medical parole. He served 22 years. What does life sentence mean in South Africa?
Parole simply means serving the rest of your sentence outside of a correctional facility. It does not mean the end of your sentence. And it is essentially a privilege, because it's based on merit. If you do not show merit for placement on parole, we simply reject your application until such time as you've convinced us that you indeed deserve parole. And equally, if you go and break the conditions, we can take you back.
Yeah.
All right, let's start by addressing the Zeffini nurse and Mangwele cases. You know, a lot of people felt, that this restored faith in our judiciary. What did you make of his judgment, Safi?
I mean, it's been very interesting, the amount of public interest in both cases and how both cases have been followed, and people's interest also in the outcomes of the court cases. And certainly there is a feeling that that the court has judged appropriately in terms of finding certainly the kidnapper in the Zeffini nurse case guilty. But it's been a 19-year process for the families involved. And I think that the court sentencing is probably only the start of the process now.
Papa Tsedu.
Yeah, I've tried to look at the matter. Obviously, I agree with Paula that there's been a lot of interest in, let's say, the Zeffini case,
yes.
Firstly. But I was just thinking about, why did this woman do it?
We still don't know.
Is it the kind of pressure that families, husbands, society places on women to bear children that would force you to go and fake? You have a pregnancy, you miscarry, you don't tell, instead you go and steal a child and live a lie. You can imagine how she's been feeling throughout all these years. So in my mind, I've been playing in that space of just trying to understand how she got to where she is now. And I can fully understand even the family of the biological parents who are saying, whatever tears, we've had those tears for 19 years. I understand all of that, but I also try and see it from where she sits and wonder why she had to do it, and the kind of conversation that she would have had with her husband on the day that her world fell apart.
That's a very interesting outlook. We haven't even thought about that. But now let's move on to the thorny or sensitive issue of Valus, as you call him, Papa Tsedu. Mixed reactions, the DA and the Freedom Front Plus saying that, of course, proper processes have been followed. Yet Justice Minister Masuta did deny parole to Valus. Let's start with you, Paula. What do you think about the judgment there?
I think most people in South Africa can remember the day, April 10, when Chris Hani was assassinated, and the state that that brought the country to, and that particular moment, the fear of that moment. I think the big issue, on the one hand, there is the issue of whether the proper processes were followed. And the other issue is the whole issue of sensitivity to the family, sensitivity around the issue of forgiveness, the idea that we should move on, and forgive and forget, when we haven't really dealt in many ways with a lot of the aftermath of apartheid. So I think that the justice system doesn't operate in a vacuum. And these are some of the conversations that we must continue to have around that.
But the issue of forgiveness versus proper processes, how do you gauge these two then?
Well, my own view is that as a country, when people sat in Kempton Park and constructed this system, the constitution and what will happen, they took the view that justice was not important, and what was important was reconciliation. That's why the TRC was called the TRC and not the JRC. You know, it was not the justice and reconciliation, it was the truth and reconciliation. So at the moment you have a situation where Valush, who killed Chris Hani and almost plunged this country into a civil war, because minutes after that killing, the initial story was not even pointing in the direction of white right-wingers. It was APLA. So you had a situation where if Valush was not arrested that day, you could have had that murder triggering an internecine war within the black community over something that we had nothing to do about. Chris was a very good man. He was a good leader. We all loved him. And so his death touched all of us in various ways. But we have a system that has been put in place by the ANC and the National Party, which says that when Valush has done the kind of sentence that he has done, he can go where Valush has gone and ask for the court to help him. And the court has now said what the court has said. This country has chosen that system, and we cannot turn around and say because it is Chris, because in terms of the law, in terms of our own emotions, we don't want Valush to get out. But in terms of the law that this country has put in place, Valush has the possibility to get out, and we should be able to live with that. Chris, in terms of the law, it's the same victim as any other murder victim in terms of the law. In terms of us and how we see him and our emotions,
so right.
It's different. But the law, and this is where this matter is at now. I hear Limpo Hani crying.
Black lives don't matter.
Yeah, she's crying. She's in anguish. I hear her. But there are also other people whose children have also been killed, whose murderers are walking the streets after parole. And those people were not even asked whether they think the guy should get out or not. Every day when a rapist goes to court, we are finding people outside with placards saying, don't give them bail, don't do this, don't do that. But the magistrate sits inside court and he goes according to the law, and he'll grant bail if the guy can show that he has an address, and he'll come to court when he's called.
I think the issue here, Paula, was a lot of people, even the SACP, were saying that he hasn't shown any remorse at all, very quickly.
And I agree with what Mathatha is saying, but I do think that the issues have not been spoken about, that we do need to be talking about issues of post-1994, where we are. If you look at a lot of the things that are happening now, I think it's because we have a scab, but we haven't really cleaned the wound.
Yeah, we really need to. All right, it's time for another quick ad break. Do stay with us.
I made a huge mistake, and I've let my fans down. I've let the sport down that I've been playing since the age of 4 that I love so deeply. I know that with this, I face consequences, and I don't want to end my career this way, and I really hope that I will be given another chance to play this game.
It's February 2016 and the fees have not fallen.
Some other students are struggling, they don't have money to even pay the rent outside. They're struggling with food and they don't have a place to stay.
I have lost hope in NSFAS. I'm now applying for jobs at funeral parlors to watch dead bodies to finish my studies.
The race to replace Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni after 30 years in power is coming to an end.
Voting him out and letting him hand over power peacefully to another president would be the biggest sign of Uganda's democratic maturity.
Welcome back. This is Media Monitor. My guest this morning are forces to be reckoned with in the media fraternity. That's Mr. Mathatha Tsedu, Sanef Director, as well as Ms. Paula Fray, Managing Director at Fray Inter-media. Now, South African schools have been fingered as the main centers for corruption by an international lobby group, Corruption Watch. Corruption Watch conducted 10 investigations of alleged corruption in schools during 2015. In all cases, the school principal was found to be in the center of corruption. 9 out of 10 cases found out that school principals were abusing school funds for their personal gains. I think, why is there no regulation when it comes to this? Who should be to blame? Once again, let's start with you.
And I wonder if we could just go back though to the Corruption Watch report, because I mean, Corruption Watch is a local organization that really defines corruption in terms of public resources and public power. Yes. So it's not looking at corruption in the private sector, it's looking specifically at corruption within public resources. But it's also an organization that works at enabling ordinary citizens to be able to report corruption, to be able to identify corruption. So I think it's important to just clarify that I don't think that schools are the place of corruption in South Africa. That what Corruption Watch has said is that they have found cases of corruption in schools where they've specifically gone out and asked people to actually to report corruptions in school, and then they've subsequently investigated 10 cases. And the reason why I'm saying this is because there are many schools actually that function well, where the parents are involved, where the parent bodies are not corrupt. What we do need to though have is a system where schools are able to report corruption when it does occur. Because we've seen that when corruption occurs at school, that the people who suffer most are in fact the school children. And it's up to parents actually to be actively involved in their children's education to ensure that the money that is allocated to the school is spent appropriately on the functioning of the school. And so I think from that point of view, the story is critical because schools are so critical to South Africa.
You know what, I did an interview once and the SGBs were saying that sometimes the principals want to do their own thing. So what needs to happen there? Do you think there really is a cause for concern there, Papa Tsedu?
Yeah, there is, because sometimes you find that at some schools, the parents who are in the SGB are themselves not even really literate.
Yes.
Yeah, so the principal is the only guy who's really
running the show.
Yeah, he runs the show and is in charge, and he speaks in English sometimes. And so in those kinds of schools, you'll find that things go easily wrong. But also, for me, part of the problem, which is why you find in some of these schools a lot of corruption, parents don't get involved in all these SGBs. When the season for electing SGBs happens, people will not go for these elections. If you go to Soweto and go to a school, you'll find there are just 5 people who have turned up, and all of those 5 people are then put on the SGB. If you go to a former Model C school, the hall is full by parents who travel in the middle of the night from Soweto to go there and make sure that the thing is actually working. So it's important for parents to be involved in their school activities and affairs in order to stamp out these things. There are very little tenders that go to schools that don't need a lot of treasury scrutiny because the amounts are small. So it's like catering, cooking for the kids.
The food program.
Yeah, the food program. So that's where the corruption actually happens. And the report by Corruption Watch is dealing with those issues that have been brought to their attention. And that is important, as Paula was saying, that it is not a global view. It's a view of the cases that have been brought to them, and they are making an appeal that people should actually report even more.
All right, so that's where we leave it on corruption in schools. More Media Monitor shortly after this break.
I think in South Africa we have made a lot of progress, but we also have 2 of the most serious challenges that we see in every country. Poor implementation of the laws that we have, and poor investment and funding of the initiatives that would otherwise make significant changes. And of course also impunity. We still in South Africa do not have access to justice that is adequate to women under all circumstances.
Preparing for victory requires intense effort and teamwork. When you get to it, there is no turning back, because all eyes are on you. When it's action time, nothing should stand in your way. Sports Live tackles and analyzes all the sport action. This is the home of all your sport news, updates and more. Sports Live weekdays at 8:30 p.m.
SABC News. We report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Back. we're still discussing the biggest stories of the week. The South African economy's fate is now in the hands of international ratings agency Moody's, whose representatives are expected to be in the country this week amid fears of a possible downgrade. SABC correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease caught up with Minister Pravin Gordhan on his visit to the UK and the US in order to gain investors' confidence and avert the possible downgrade.
Moody's has us 2 notches above sub-investment grade, so they will have a bit of space if you like. What the review is about, however, is that they will come to South Africa, they will meet government, they will meet trade unions, they will meet business, they will meet academics and others in order to collect enough information to decide whether they should leave us where we are or whether they should downgrade us by 1 or 2 notches depending on their assessment. So this is an opportunity for South Africa to actually demonstrate that we are indeed resilient. We do have a story to tell. We've gone through tough times, but we have a plan to get out of it.
So your optimism since your budget speech continues, and yet there are those detractors. There are people in certain quarters that say junk status is inevitable. How do you respond to that argument?
Oh, it's very simple. People like us, and there are many in the country, want optimism and they want hope. And we will try our best right until the end. And if we fail, it shouldn't be because we haven't tried.
Now look, I spoke to Sherwin shortly after his meeting with the minister, and I really did ask him if the minister felt that a downgrade was a real possibility. But it seems that, his response was optimism in his budget speech as well as the cost-cutting measures seemed to allay those fears. Papa Tsedu.
Yeah, it's... we're actually in the hands of the guys who are going to arrive here. They are going to be the most famous arrivals this week. I think there will be television crews at the airport. Moody's and all the others have always been coming in and out of the country, but this particular visit is going to be in our face, and they'll be followed wherever they go, because we've now placed ourselves in a situation where our fate is no longer in our hands and what we do, but in the hands of people who will come here and spend a week and then leave and go and make a decision that can make us or break us. So that's really the tragedy of where we are and how we got here. And it's a pity for Pravin that he has to be running around the world, not even just looking for investments, but trying to stave off what some people see as an inevitable tsunami that is coming. Yeah.
Paula, what do you think?
Well, the minister has said that he's taking a fact-based tour to the US and the UK, and so it's quite important to get out there and to reassure everyone that he's committed to our fiscal goals, as he says he's doing. But it's also about perception, and it's about a confidence in our economy. And the fact that the minister is also on the front pages of other newspapers regarding the questions for the Hawks kind of shows the dilemma he's in. On the one hand, he's trying to show up confidence on South Africa's economy. On the other hand, people aren't really sure if he's going to be around much longer.
But look, now let's move aside from that, from the famous arrival, Papa Tsedu. But have we, as South Africa, then looked at what the meaning of a possible downgrade could mean for each and every one of us, and actually try to see how we're going to move forward from that? Isn't that what we should be looking at?
The issue of downgrades and where our status is, where we were at some point at A+ and then B, and now we are just above junk status, has never been really an issue for the common us. It was an issue for the guys at the JSE and the guys who walk around with calculators in their pockets. But given what has now happened, we are now grappling with this issue, and we're trying to understand who's moody. Where did they drop from? Why have they become so important in our lives? But the other reality is that given the kind of inequalities that persist in our country, it's difficult to find consensus, the kind of consensus that a country like Germany, for example, would be able to generate between the working class and the ruling class within Germany, because the inequalities are not as pronounced as they are here. Here you have the unions who are representing people who are earning 2,000 rands, and they are saying, no, you can't say to me, tighten the belt. I have no belt at all, let alone tighten it. So the kind of consensus that the minister seems to think that it's necessary in order to stave off the downgrade, it's difficult to generate here because people don't have the same platform or where they start from.
You know, bringing me to my next point, Papa Tsedu, is that many people don't consider the fact that global economic instability also affects how South Africa performs as an emerging economy, Paula.
And certainly, I mean, I think we've seen the impact of global perceptions in December when suddenly the rand plummeted and there was a real impact on the local economy around that. And as Mathatha was saying, you know, I mean, the big issue here really is that the potential impact on the economy is going to be great. I mean, we're talking about a higher cost of being able to get money, either both government and private companies. Just generally, the confidence in investing in South Africa is going to be hugely affected.
All right, that's where we leave it on the minister's travel overseas. Let's now take a look at our next story, where President Jacob Zuma concluded his two-day state visit to Nigeria after addressing the South Africa-Nigeria Business Council in Abuja. Now, he told delegates if South Africa and Nigeria move in the same direction, they will lift up the continent. Let's have a quick look at this insert.
If these two countries are big leading economies in the continent, and if that is the case, we have to give leadership. And if we are to give leadership, we've got to work in a different way, to be more smarter, to be more active, to be more visionary, to be more innovative. So those are the kind of things we've got to do so that we can pull the whole continent together.
So yesterday, I think you...
How do we open the two countries, but also look at the regulations, look at the regime of how companies that come to invest, the situation is made easier without cutting corners, without allowing cutting corners. That's what we are dealing with. And therefore, those matters are being addressed. The very fact that we are having the Business Nigeria-South Africa Council, these matters are going to be placed before the table and be discussed. And then the ministers that are involved, who are part of government, will then be in a position to look at these issues and address them. So I wouldn't want them to be put as the biggest problems that exist between the two countries. The fact that we are talking about them, it means there is business happening and experiencing certain difficulties, and we are saying let us address those.
As we speak of a looming junk status review, Papa Tsedu, isn't it a good thing then that South Africa is looking for aid in Africa?
Yeah, the visit by the president to Nigeria, it's a very important step. And the fact that President Buhari has seen it fit to have the first visit, state visit coming from South Africa must count for something. These are the major engines of growth on the continent. And it's a pity that the relations between Nigeria and South Africa have soured somewhat. There was a time when Mbeki and Obasanjo were in charge of the two countries when it was really all moving together. The two guys were really in sync, both for continental issues and for national issues. So what the President Zuma is trying to do now is to rebuild those relations so that we can get back to the point where we were, for example. And that has to be good. I know that there are issues in Nigeria around Boko Haram and the fact that MTN was slapped with a big fine because of something that relates to Boko Haram also. So, but it's very important that this trip has happened, and it must open the way for other things to happen without, as the president says, cutting corners. Yeah.
Paula, what did you think?
I mean, it's an incredibly important trip, and I think, one of the things that was really disappointing was the level of coverage in South African media. I would have expected a lot more coverage, a lot more analysis, a lot more in-depth review of what the president was going to do, what he had done, and what we can hope to achieve from it. We know that intra-Africa trade is the future for the continent. We know that regional integration is the future for the continent, and yet very often we treat these stories or these visits as secondary, and I'd like to see these kinds of stories getting more prominence and being treated with more urgency amongst the media.
Look, Mathatha, you mentioned this in your first response. I mean, what kind then of relations and debates should the two powerhouses be focusing on, especially at such tough economic times for both of them?
It's around issues of the economy. How, as the president was saying, how do you make it easier for Nigerian businesses to come into South Africa without having to jump hoops and hurdles about being suspected of being part of the 419 scam? Everyone who comes from Nigeria is supposed to be a 419 scammer, and South African businesses that go into Nigeria without being subjected to suspicions of just fronting for white business, and you come here with superiority complexes. So it's important to smooth the surface so that these economic debates and interactions can happen in a space that is
conducive for a better relationship. All right, that's where we leave it on that. We're going to take a quick final ad break, and after that we get to read your tweets and of course wrap up the show. Do stay with us.
We as the ANC wish to reiterate our call for strengthening of laws that protect and promote human dignity and equality by criminalizing racism. We call for the establishment of a national register for racist offenders. As part of tightening the legislation with racism, we will ensure that racists are blacklisted.
I'm just saddened that the ongoing finger pointing that you are, as if that solves the problem. In fact, there are white people that are racist, there are black people that are racist. Therefore, we have a situation in this country of racism which is manifesting itself.
This color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at answer.org.za. ANSA is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
Get all the latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
You're still watching Media Monitor. Welcome back. You can still quickly share your views on Twitter on our discussions today. Now, this week marks Racism Week in the country. This initiative follows a number of racism incidents across the country. Paula, what is your take? Is this initiative going to achieve what it's supposed to?
I think a week is a very, very short time to have the conversations we need to have. So I think that hopefully that what this week can do is to kickstart a conversation.
What do you think, Papa Tsedu?
It's a debate we should have had over time. But it's a good initiative. The Human Rights Commission, for example, from tomorrow, they have a 2-day conference that is looking at the 20 years of their existence. And at the center of that whole debate is the issue of racism and what their own role is in fighting racism from a Section 9, Article 9 point of view.
Look, we've got 5 minutes extra now. Let's talk about what do you think caused racism to be so rife in the country? Is it the fact that we were not talking about it? Or what do you think, Paula?
Well, I think, and part of the drive for the New South Africa was to kind of smooth over cracks and not to really tackle issues in order to be this rainbow nation that everyone wanted us to be. And while I think that reconciliation was good and important, I do think that as a country, if we want to move forward, we need to deal substantively with the past. We need to be able to talk about issues. And one of the things that very often we undermine is racism really is about disparities, about unequal access. It's about power. It's about access to power. And I think one of the issues that we haven't really dealt with is to talk about who has access to power. Young people talk about privilege, and it's a very important conversation to be having. I think we need to be asking who has privilege, and then we make assumptions that everyone is equal, but the reality is very, very far from that.
I think you mentioned earlier, Papa Tsedu, that we need to look into the laws as well that were pre-apartheid in terms of trying to deal with the current scourge in terms of what is happening now in terms of our judiciary as well as racism.
But it's also just to understand that the whole concept of colonialism was based on race. The Europeans considered themselves superior and had a God-given right to enslave all of us who were not European, and hence all the slaves from Africa that were taken to America. Some of us were enslaved right here on Mother Africa. And so the struggle for freedom was a struggle against racism, essentially. But when 1993 came and the guys who sat at Kempton Park said there was an attempt to smooth over things and rush into office and live a life of a lie, that we were now a new people when we weren't. And because you can't keep living a lie forever, the worms are coming out, whether they come out in the form of penny sparrow or the students at UFS who were urinating in food and making mamas run, and those mamas agreeing to do it. When if it had been black students who had asked them to do that, they would have told them, go and ask your mother to do it and not me. So we are now coming face to face with the results of not dealing with racism at Kempton Park.
All right.
And we have to do it now.
All right. Well, that's where we leave it on that discussion. Let's quickly have a look at your tweets before we say goodbye now. And of course, Abel Matonsi says it's painful. The man is not honest. He does not want to tell what transpired. I think it's in relation to Valusa's parole. Gumlo up the back says this says there's nothing called life imprisonment. Who's Jay Valusa's handlers? And last but not least, Luvo Kantsundu says it may be good for the word economy, but did we introspect the outcomes of the relationships? And of course, that's where we leave it with your program today. This has been a live broadcast of Media Monitor. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me thank my studio guests, Papa Tsedu, Paula. Thank you so much for being with us. And please, we return next week, same time and place. So please make a date to be with us. Your comments and feedback or to view us, do find us on digital as well as social media space. I'm Alicia Jali. This is SABC News. Do enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Goodbye.
latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
Controlesa is actually stirring the pot here.
I'm sure they've been consulted as Controlesa. They did not see a snake. Now that in certain areas there are certain benefits that might possibly be accruing, there is a snake, now we need to reverse the process.
I agree, but it is not above the sovereignty of the people. The very same court you're talking about.
The sovereignty of the people, probably you should explain that to me.
The sovereignty of the people is above everything.
It is not proper the way facts are presented to the public. Are you in contact with Khosekgolo Motshodi?
He was kicked out by the court because he wanted to be amicus curiae.
For your weekly dose of all things legal, join Dumile Mateza every Sunday at 2 p.m. only on SABC News Channel.